Black tennis champion denied VIP table at country club. 8 minutes later, her biggest sponsor walks in and fires the entire staff. Before we dive into this incredible story of justice and karma, if tales of standing up against discrimination inspire you, hit that subscribe button. You won't believe what happens next. The golden hour sun cast long shadows across the pristine fairways of Millbrook Country Club on this warm Thursday evening. At exactly 6:47 p.m., Naomi Osaka, casual white sundress, simple gold jewelry, tennis bag over shoulder, confident but understated presence, approached the club's imposing marble entrance. She'd just finished an intense practice session at the nearby tennis academy and wanted nothing more than a quiet dinner before heading home. The 27-year-old moved with the understated confidence of someone who'd conquered Wimbledon and spoken at the United Nations, but tonight she wasn't here as a celebrity. She was simply a young woman hoping to enjoy a peaceful meal. The maitre d', Marcus Whitfield, mid-50s, pale skin, silver hair slicked back, expensive black suit, condescending smile, barely looked up from his leather-bound reservation book as she approached the hostess stand. His voice dripped with practiced politeness that felt more like a dismissal. "Excuse me, miss," Marcus said, his tone carrying that particular inflection reserved for people he considered beneath his station. "The dining room is for members and their guests only." Naomi smiled politely, her voice warm and respectful. "I'd like to make a reservation for one, please. I can pay whatever the guest fee is." Marcus's eyes swept over her appearance with obvious judgment. The simple dress, the tennis bag, the absence of obvious luxury brands. His smile tightened into something that looked more like a grimace. "I'm afraid we're fully booked this evening," he said curtly. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at the public restaurant down the road." Something in his tone made Naomi pause. She'd heard that particular inflection before, in locker rooms and press conferences, the kind reserved for people who supposedly didn't belong. "How fully booked are you?" she asked calmly. Glancing past him into the dining room where she could clearly see several empty tables with crisp white tablecloths waiting for guests. Marcus's facade began to crack slightly. "Very busy," he replied with growing irritation. "Now if you'll excuse me, I have actual members to attend to." The word "actual" hung in the air like smoke from a fire that was just beginning to catch. 2 other staff members had gathered near the hostess stand, sensing the growing tension. Sarah Chen, early 30s, Asian American, nervous expression, black server uniform, and David Rodriguez, late 20s, Latino, uncomfortable shifting, white server shirt, exchanged worried glances, but remained silent. At a nearby table, wealthy club member Jennifer Walsh, 40s, blonde hair in perfect waves, expensive pearl necklace, judgmental expression, whispered loudly enough to be heard by half the dining room. "Some people just don't understand boundaries." Naomi's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but her voice remained steady as steel. "I understand boundaries perfectly. I'm simply asking for dinner service that you provide to paying customers." Marcus leaned forward slightly, his mask of politeness finally slipping completely. "Miss, I'm going to ask you once more to leave before this becomes unpleasant. This establishment has standards." The word "standards" was delivered with particular emphasis, like a weapon designed to wound. Sarah shifted uncomfortably behind the bar, recognizing the coded language, but feeling powerless to intervene. "What standards am I failing to meet exactly?" Naomi asked directly, her tone still calm, but with an edge that suggested she was done playing games. Marcus's composure cracked further. The kind of standards that our members expect when they come here to relax among their own kind. The dining room seemed to freeze. Several wealthy diners looked up from their conversations, some with shock, others with shameful recognition of words they'd heard before. Two teenage girls at a corner booth, Emma and Madison, had pulled out their phones and were recording, whispering, "This is so messed up," to each other. Club security officer Tony Mitchell, 40s, white, muscular build, black security uniform, stern expression, approached after being summoned by Marcus's subtle hand signal. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to handling difficult situations. "Yes," Marcus said quickly, his voice rising slightly with false righteousness. "This woman is refusing to leave after being told we're at capacity." Tony looked between them, then at the obviously empty tables visible through the dining room's glass doors, his brow furrowed with confusion and growing concern. Naomi pulled out her phone, her movements deliberate and controlled. She made a brief call, her voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable authority. "Hi, it's Naomi. I'm at Millbrook Country Club and I'm being denied service. Yes, that Millbrook. Can you handle this? Thank you." The conversation was brief, but Marcus caught enough to make his face go pale. "Who did you just call?" he demanded, his voice betraying the first hints of genuine concern. "Someone who can clarify the situation," Naomi replied with the kind of calm that comes from knowing you hold all the cards. Jennifer Walsh had joined a small crowd of onlookers now, her voice carrying across the marble floor. "Security should escort her out immediately. We shouldn't have to deal with this kind of disruption during our dinner." Emma, one of the teenagers recording, stood up with the righteous indignation that only youth can muster. "She's not disrupting anything. She just asked for a table." "Sit down, young lady," Jennifer snapped, her pearls catching the light as she turned. "This doesn't concern children." Sarah, the server who'd been watching with growing discomfort, finally found her voice. "Mr. Whitfield, maybe we should just—" "Sarah, get back to work," Marcus cut her off sharply. "This doesn't concern the staff." Tony was looking increasingly uncomfortable. In his 15 years of security work, he'd learned to recognize when something wasn't quite right, and every instinct was telling him this situation was heading in the wrong direction. "Ma'am," he said to Naomi, his tone respectful but firm, "can you tell me exactly what happened here?" Naomi's response was clear and measured. "I asked for a table. I was told they were fully booked despite obvious vacancies. When I questioned this, I was told this establishment has standards and serves people among their own kind." Tony's expression darkened considerably. He turned to Marcus, his voice carrying a new edge. "Did you say that?" Marcus scrambled for control. "I was explaining our membership policies. This club has certain expectations." The crowd was growing larger by the minute. Emma's TikTok video was already being shared with the caption, "Country Club racism happening right now," and her viewer count was climbing rapidly. At exactly 6:55 p.m., the front doors opened with purpose. Richard Sterling, 60s, distinguished white hair, expensive gray suit, authoritative presence, slight limp from an old tennis injury, walked in with the kind of deliberate stride that suggested he was a man accustomed to being in charge of every room he entered. Marcus didn't recognize him immediately, but Tony straightened up like a soldier seeing his commanding officer. He knew exactly who Richard Sterling was, and more importantly, what he represented. "Naomi," Richard said warmly as he approached, his voice carrying the kind of familiarity that comes from years of professional partnership. "I got your call. What seems to be the problem here?" The crowd had grown larger now, with nearly 24 people watching the unfolding drama. Emma's live stream had reached over 3,000 viewers and climbing, with comments flooding in from across the country. Marcus finally looked more closely at Naomi, then at Richard Sterling, and something began to click in his mind like tumblers falling into place in a lock. "Wait, are you—" "Naomi Osaka," she said simply, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who'd never needed to prove herself to anyone. four-time Grand Slam champion, former world #1, and Richard's biggest client. The color drained from Marcus's face like water from a broken dam. Jennifer Walsh's mouth fell open so wide you could have caught flies. Tony took a step back, suddenly realizing the magnitude of what had just unfolded in front of him. Richard's voice was ice-cold as he addressed Marcus directly. "Did you just refuse service to one of the most accomplished athletes in the world because of how she looks?" I didn't recognize," Marcus stammered, his earlier confidence evaporating like morning mist. "That's exactly the problem," Richard interrupted, his tone carrying the kind of finality that ends careers. "Let me clarify something for you, Mr. Whitfield. Sterling Sports Group owns a 60% controlling stake in this country club. We've been the primary investor, keeping this place financially afloat for the past 3 years." The revelation hit the crowd like a physical force. Several club members gasped audibly, and you could literally hear the sharp intake of breath from a dozen people at once. Furthermore, Richard continued, his voice growing colder with each word, "Naomi has been my personal guest here dozens of times over the past 2 years. Her membership application has been on file and approved for 6 months. She has more right to be here than half the people in this dining room." Marcus was visibly shaking now, sweat beading on his forehead despite the club's perfect climate control. "Mr. Sterling, I had no idea." "No," Naomi interjected, her voice calm but carrying the weight of years of experience with this exact situation. "You had no interest in knowing. You made assumptions based on how I looked and how I was dressed." She paused, letting her words sink in before delivering the question that would haunt Marcus for the rest of his career. "If I'd been wearing designer clothes or arrived in a luxury car, would you have treated me differently?" The question hung in the air, like a sword suspended by a thread, unanswered because everyone in that room knew the truth. Richard turned to address the gathered crowd, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd built an empire from nothing. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to address this publicly because what happened here tonight represents everything that's wrong with exclusive institutions." Emma's live stream now had over 5,000 viewers, with #Millbrook Accountability starting to trend on multiple platforms. "Effective immediately," Richard announced, his words falling like a judge's gavel. "Marcus Whitfield is terminated from his position. Furthermore, any club member who supported or encouraged this discriminatory behavior will have their membership reviewed by our board of directors." Jennifer Walsh began backing away from the crowd, suddenly very interested in her phone and hoping no one had recorded her earlier comments. "But this isn't just about punishment," Naomi said, stepping forward with the grace of someone who'd stood on tennis courts in front of millions. "This is about education and change. Mr. Sterling and I will be implementing mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all staff and members. This club will become a model for inclusion, not exclusion." Sarah, the server who'd been uncomfortable throughout the entire ordeal, approached hesitantly. "Ms. Osaka, I'm so sorry I didn't speak up sooner. I knew what was happening was wrong, but I was afraid of losing my job." Naomi smiled at her with genuine warmth. "Sarah, you're exactly the kind of employee this club needs. People who can recognize right from wrong, even when it's difficult. Would you be interested in heading our new hospitality training program?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears of relief and gratitude. "Yes, absolutely. I'd be honored." Tony, the security officer, stepped forward next. "Ms. Osaka, I owe you an apology too. I should have recognized what was happening sooner and put a stop to it." "Tony, you questioned what was going on when others stayed silent. That shows integrity," Naomi replied. "We'd like you to help train our security staff on recognizing and preventing discrimination before it escalates." The transformation in the room was immediate and profound. What had begun as a moment of humiliation had become a catalyst for real change. Over the following weeks, the incident sparked nationwide conversations about discrimination in private clubs and exclusive establishments. Emma's video garnered over 2 million views, with #Millbrook Accountability and #SpeakUp Don't Stay Quiet trending for days across multiple social media platforms. 3 major private clubs across the country voluntarily implemented similar diversity initiatives after seeing the positive response to Millbrook's transformation. Marcus Whitfield faced federal discrimination charges and was ultimately banned from working in hospitality management. Jennifer Walsh's membership was permanently revoked after additional incidents from her past came to light, including complaints from staff members who had previously been too afraid to speak out. Most importantly, Millbrook Country Club became the first in the region to achieve certification as an inclusive hospitality venue from the National Diversity Institute. Naomi hosted a charity tennis tournament there 6 months later, with proceeds going to organizations fighting discrimination in sports and hospitality. The young women who recorded the incident, Emma and Madison, started a social media campaign called #SpeakUp.Don't-Stay-Quiet, encouraging bystanders to intervene when they witness discrimination. Their movement has reached over 50,000 young activists across the country. Richard Sterling expanded the diversity initiative to all Sterling Sports Group properties, creating a new standard for inclusive business practices in the sports industry. The program has been studied and replicated by dozens of companies worldwide. Sometimes justice doesn't come from courts or lawsuits or angry protests. Sometimes it comes from people who are brave enough to stand up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it costs them something. Naomi Osaka didn't just fight for a dinner reservation that night, she fought for dignity, respect, and the fundamental right of every person to be judged by their character rather than their appearance. 8 minutes was all it took to change not just one club, but an entire industry's approach to inclusion and respect. If this story moved you, subscribe for more incredible tales of courage, justice, and people who refused to stay silent when they witnessed injustice.